Have you ever wondered how far entitlement can push someone before they push back? Picture this, a bustling grocery store parking lot on an otherwise typical day, where simmering tensions explode into a confrontation that no one saw coming but everyone would remember. When an accusation turns into something far more sinister, it becomes more than just a clash over a parking spot. It becomes a story about standing one's ground when faced with deep-rooted prejudice. In a world where perception can be swayed in an instant and narratives twist faster than a speeding headline, one man finds himself in the center of it all, faced with a choice that would change everything. But when he hits back, both figuratively and literally, it's not just the aggressor who's shocked. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to make sure you don't miss a beat. It was an ordinary day at the grocery store, where the dance of hurried shoppers and packed carts created the usual chaos. John, a man who always tried to keep his cool, found a rare parking spot right near the entrance. Just as he shifted his car into park, he noticed a woman storming toward him, her eyes sharp as knives. Lisa, dressed in designer shades and a deep frown, barked, "That was my spot. You had no right." Her voice sliced through the air, drawing glances from passers-by. John raised his hands, a peaceful gesture, and replied, "Sorry, I didn't see you waiting." But before he could say more, Lisa's voice climbed a notch higher, laced with entitlement. "Typical," she hissed, throwing in a racial slur that hit John like a punch to the gut. A moment of tension settled over the parking lot. Some shoppers slowed their pace, subtly turning to witness what felt like a live spectacle. John's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. "Please, let's not escalate this," he said, his tone measured. But Lisa wasn't interested in calming down. "You people always think you can get away with anything," she snapped, her words dripping with a venom that made heads turn. John felt his pulse quicken, a mix of disbelief and anger rising in his chest. He'd been here before, too many times, and it never got easier. He took a breath, aware that every move he made was being watched, analyzed, judged. Lisa's eyes darted to the crowd, as if drawing power from their attention. Her voice became sharper, each word calculated to strike. "You should be ashamed of yourself, taking what isn't yours." John, calm but firm, said, "I'll move my car if it means that much to you." But this wasn't about the parking spot anymore. This was about power, a twisted display of superiority. Lisa stepped closer, crossing an unspoken boundary, her eyes daring him to react. The air grew thick, charged with an uneasy tension. A mother hurried her child away, sensing that whatever was about to happen wouldn't be pretty. John clenched the steering wheel, the weight of countless past encounters pressing on him. He knew that restraint was his greatest weapon. "Look, let's just end this here," he suggested one last time, trying to diffuse the situation. But Lisa's pride had already been pricked, and her ego demanded satisfaction. Her face twisted into a smile that wasn't friendly at all. "No, we're not done here," she said, eyes narrowing. She moved even closer, practically leaning into his window, where whispers from the crowd buzzed like an electric current. The showdown had only begun, and everyone could feel the storm brewing. The tension between them crackled like static. John, hoping to leave the confrontation behind, slowly opened his door to step out. But before his foot touched the ground, Lisa's hand shot out, shoving him back with an unexpected force. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the hostility escalated. John's eyes widened, not in fear, but in disbelief. He raised a hand defensively, his voice steady but edged with urgency. "Enough, Lisa. This is getting out of control." But control was the last thing on her mind. She slapped him across the face, a sharp, loud sound that seemed to pause the world for a split second. John's instinct flared before reason could reel it back in, and he delivered a slap of his own. Unlike hers, his was measured, almost restrained, as if to say, "I will defend myself, but I won't stoop to your level." The slap echoed, resonating through the parking lot, where time seemed to stretch. Lisa's mouth fell open, eyes widening with shock. She hadn't expected resistance. She'd expected submission, silence, the same passivity she assumed she could enforce. But now, stunned, she stumbled back, clutching her cheek as if he'd struck her with the full force of his fury. Murmurs from the crowd grew louder, some voices judgmental, others sympathetic. "You saw that, didn't you?" Lisa shouted to the bystanders, clutching at a narrative that painted her as the victim. Her voice quivered with a mix of rage and faux vulnerability. "He hit me. This man assaulted me." John, breathing heavily, felt the weight of countless eyes pressing into him. Every second mattered now, and every choice he made would either protect or condemn him. He glanced around, seeing faces that mirrored everything from concern to silent judgment. "You pushed me first," he said, his voice low, but carrying the gravity of truth. Lisa's expression shifted, a flicker of uncertainty breaking through her practiced indignation. It was in that sliver of hesitation that the crowd's loyalty began to waver. An elderly man in the back muttered, "I saw it." She started it. A woman in a floral dress nodded silently, crossing her arms. But Lisa's voice drowned them out, rising in volume as she wailed, "How dare you? I'll have you arrested for this." The parking lot was no longer just a place for groceries. It had become a stage, and the drama was pulling in an audience. John swallowed hard, knowing he needed to keep his composure. One misstep, one wrong word, and the fragile balance would tip. And deep down, he knew this was far from over. The moment hung in the air, a pregnant pause before the storm. As John walked into the store, he felt the heat of the encounter still clinging to his skin. He tried to focus on the mundane task of picking up groceries, but the weight of the confrontation buzzed in the back of his mind. Behind him, Lisa's fury simmered, unwilling to fade quietly. She lingered in the parking lot, her gaze locked on John's car like a predator circling prey. With a glance around to make sure no one was watching too closely, she gripped her keys, the jagged edge catching the glint of the afternoon sun. The metallic scrape of key against paint screeched as she carved a deep, angry line across the side of John's car. A few cars away, an elderly couple paused mid-conversation, their eyes widening as they realized what was unfolding. "Is she?" the woman whispered, half in disbelief. But before they could react, Lisa, eyes burning with indignation, stepped back and took one more bitter look at John's car. The anger in her chest only grew, unfurling like a flame starved of oxygen. Without a second thought, she got into her own vehicle, revved the engine, and reversed with calculated malice. The impact jolted both cars, metal crunching and buckling as her rear bumper slammed into John's front end. The shock of it vibrated through the pavement, leaving a silence that felt louder than any scream. Inside the store, John flinched, a strange sense of dread pulling at him. He turned toward the entrance, and as if on cue, a young cashier called out, "Hey, sir! Someone just hit your car!" The words punched him harder than Lisa's earlier slap, and he bolted outside, leaving his cart behind. The scene that greeted him was chaos, a damaged car, onlookers murmuring, and Lisa's vehicle speeding away with screeching tires. John's eyes swept over the deep gash and the crumpled hood, disbelief settling into anger. This wasn't just an argument anymore. This was a deliberate act of vengeance. With a controlled exhale, John reached for his phone, dialing the police with hands that trembled from the adrenaline. "Yes, I need to report an incident. Yes, right now, in the grocery store parking lot." His voice was firm, but under it was a current of frustration and exhaustion. Around him, the crowd shifted, some offering murmured sympathies, others watching with a detached curiosity reserved for drama that didn't touch their lives. The damage was done, both to his car and to his trust in the idea that things could ever stay civil when prejudice stirred the pot. But this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of a fight John never wanted but could no longer avoid. The police arrived swiftly, lights flashing a red and blue staccato against the evening sky. John stood beside his damaged car, arms crossed as officers took in the scene. Lisa, who had returned to the lot to tell her side of the story, approached them with a rehearsed look of distress. "Officer, I need to report an attack," she exclaimed, her voice quivering theatrically. John clenched his jaw, the absurdity of her claim making his muscles tense, but he said nothing yet, waiting as the truth teetered on the precipice of her performance. "This man," Lisa pointed a manicured finger at John, "hit me and threatened me. He's dangerous." One of the officers glanced at John, who stood tall and composed, his gaze unwavering. Before he could respond, witnesses stepped forward, their voices blending into a collective testimony. "I saw it all," said an elderly man who had watched from his car. "She was the one who started it, pushed him, and slapped him first." A young woman in yoga pants added, "And she keyed his car and rammed it. He's not lying." The officers exchanged glances, their body language shifting from suspicion to understanding. Lisa's expression faltered, the false bravado cracking as the weight of witness accounts pressed down on her fabricated narrative. Then came the definitive proof. An officer returned from speaking to the store's security team, holding up a tablet showing footage from the parking lot cameras. The grainy but clear video replayed the keying incident and the rear ending. Lisa's mouth fell open, and for the first time, true panic shadowed her features. John watched, a silent storm of emotions twisting inside him, from relief to a deep, simmering frustration at how close he had come to being wrongfully accused. The officer sighed, turning to Lisa with an expression that said it all. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for assault and property damage." The handcuffs clicked shut around Lisa's wrists, her protests turning to shrill cries. "You don't understand. I was provoked," she yelled, eyes wide with a last desperate plea. But it was too late. The tide had turned, and no amount of performance could rewrite what was already seen, heard, and recorded. John exhaled, the knots of tension in his body unwinding just a fraction. It was a victory, sure, but it didn't erase the sting of the day's events or the reality of how easily the scales of justice could have tipped against him without evidence and allies. Yet, amidst the chaos, a silent resolve built within him. This was just the beginning of an arduous path through a system he knew all too well could be as fragile as it was blind. The courtroom was a stark contrast to the chaos of the parking lot, its polished benches, towering bookshelves, and stern faces of the jury setting a scene as tense as it was solemn. John sat at the plaintiff's table, posture straight, but eyes heavy with the exhaustion of the past few weeks. Lisa entered, flanked by her attorney, wearing an expression carefully curated to convey regret. Her gaze darted nervously between the judge and the jurors, who sat with faces unreadable. As the trial began, whispers of anticipation and judgment echoed faintly in the room, blending with the shuffle of papers and clearing of throats. Lisa's attorney opened with a plea for sympathy, painting her as a woman overwhelmed by personal challenges, suggesting her actions were an unfortunate, isolated lapse. "My client had a moment of poor judgment," he said, voice dripping with calculated sincerity. But when Lisa took the stand, trying to milk that sympathy with practiced tears and a faltering voice, John's jaw clenched. It wasn't the false humility that stung. It was the ease with which she tried to manipulate the narrative, turning herself into a victim. The jurors shifted slightly, some casting sidelong glances that hinted at doubt. Then came the turning point. Witness after witness recounted the incident, detailing not just what they saw, but the fury in Lisa's actions. "She hit him first," said the elderly man, voice strong despite his years. "He defended himself, that's all." The young woman in yoga pants took her turn, describing the deliberate keying and the violent rear-ending of John's car. Each statement chipped away at Lisa's facade, and when the store's security footage was played, an audible gasp rippled through the room. The grainy, undeniable evidence left no space for reinterpretation. Lisa's confident mask cracked, and a flicker of desperation crossed her face. John sat through it all, unmoving yet hyper-aware of every word, every shifting body in the room. The jury deliberated for what felt like an eternity, every second stretching taut with unspoken tension. When they returned, their verdict was clear: guilty of assault and property damage. The gavel's sharp bang marked the end of a chapter that had tested John's patience, dignity, and faith in justice. But as the echoes died away, he couldn't shake the bitter truth that while he had won this battle, the war against the deeper prejudices that fueled it was far from over. As the courthouse emptied, the air felt lighter, but John's chest still carried the weight of the day. Victory in the courtroom was supposed to bring closure, a sense of justice served, but it felt more like a brief reprieve. Outside, reporters shouted questions, their cameras clicking like a storm of locusts, each flash a reminder that this wasn't just his story anymore. It was a spectacle, a headline, another incident fueling debates that rarely saw real resolution. John took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the crowd, finding familiar faces mixed with strangers who had come to witness or judge. Lisa was led away, her expression hollow, the fight drained from her eyes. There was a moment when their eyes met, brief, raw, and full of unspoken truths. Her gaze was no longer fierce, but distant, almost lost, as though she finally realized the consequences of her choices. But empathy was a luxury John couldn't afford just now. He turned away, feeling a pang of something that wasn't quite anger, nor was it relief. It was the residue of a battle won, but not forgotten. The voices of the witnesses echoed in his mind, their courage to step forward in a world that often favored silence, a rare glimmer of hope. As John drove home, the hum of the city blurred into the background, his thoughts replaying the confrontation, the courtroom drama, and the fractured trust that would take time to heal. "Justice is served," he muttered under his breath, but it felt like a statement he was trying to convince himself of. The road stretched ahead, endless and dark, mirroring the broader fight against prejudice and systemic bias that no court ruling could ever fully settle. He knew this wasn't an isolated case. Stories like his played out daily, too often without witnesses or evidence to tip the scales. The victory was bittersweet, a reminder that while moments of justice were possible, they were far from guaranteed. He thought of the generations before him who fought battles far more perilous and won victories far smaller. They too must have felt this same hollow triumph, knowing that true peace required more than a single win. It required the slow, arduous work of changing hearts and dismantling long-held beliefs. John tightened his grip on the steering wheel, eyes steely with determination. The fight wasn't over. It had merely entered a new phase, and he would be ready for it, come what may. Have you ever witnessed a situation like this? Do you think justice was served in this case? What would you have done in John's position? Share your thoughts below. And if you enjoy stories that make you think and spark conversation, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an update.